They banned him from the tables, escorted him out the front door, and put his name on a list that was supposed to keep him out forever. But you can't blacklist a man who's building the very empire that makes your city relevant. By the time Dana White was done, the casinos that had thrown him out were hosting his events, plastering his fighters on their billboards, and cutting him checks with more zeros than any blackjack table ever could. This is the story of how a broke kid from South Boston got banned from Las Vegas and then turned around and bought the whole game, the kid who never backed down. To understand Dana White, you have to go back before the private jets and the sold-out arenas and the nine-figure paydays. You have to go back before the press conferences and the pay-per-view records and the $4 billion sale. You have to go back to the beginning, back to a kid who figured out very early that the world was not keeping score on his behalf, that nobody was coming to hand him anything, that if he wanted something, he was going to have to want it harder than everyone else in the room. Dana Frederick White Jr. was born on July 28, 1969 in Manchester, Connecticut. His parents split early. His mother, June, raised him the way women in that situation raise children, on instinct and necessity, and whatever the next city offered. The family moved constantly. Hartford, Las Vegas briefly, which matters later, Maine. The kind of childhood where you learn to read a new room fast because there is always a new room. The family moved, and you learned to adapt fast. Then, South Boston. And that is where the story really starts. Because South Boston in the 1970s and 80s was not the neighborhood it eventually became. It was not the condos and the coffee shops and the young professionals jogging along the waterfront. It was Irish Catholic and working class and completely unforgiving. It was a place where how you carried yourself determined what happened to you, where you learned to stand your ground or you got run over, and the lesson came early and it came hard, and it did not repeat itself. Dana was a fighter from the moment he arrived, not a brawler, not the kind of kid who swung first and thought later. Something more deliberate than that. He understood violence the way certain people do, not as something to be afraid of, but as a language with its own grammar. And when he found boxing, something clicked into place that never came loose again. It was not just the physical part, though he was athletic, moved well, had good hands. It was the philosophy of it. Two people, one ring, every variable stripped away until all that remained was preparation and will. No teammates to cover for you. No referee decision that could not be avoided with the right performance. You win, or you do not. You prepared, or you did not. The sport had no patience for excuses, and neither, from that point forward, did Dana White. He attended Herman High School in Maine and later enrolled at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. He dropped out. School moved too slowly. It felt like waiting, and Dana White had no capacity for waiting. He needed to be inside something, needed the pressure of real stakes and real consequences and real action. His father was largely absent throughout all of it. His mother worked. His grandmother helped hold things together. He grew up without a safety net and without anyone telling him the world owed him a softer landing. He grew up with a chip on his shoulder the size of the Boston Garden. And unlike most people who carry something like that, who spend their lives trying to set it down, Dana White never put it down for a single day. He carried it into every negotiation, every confrontation, every room where someone looked at him like he did not belong. Some men spend their whole lives running from where they came from. Dana White built an empire out of it. In the early 1990s, Dana White made a decision that seemed completely irrational to everyone who knew him. He was going to Vegas, not because he had a plan waiting for him there, not because he had money or connections, or anyone holding a door open. Because Vegas felt like the kind of city where the rules had some give in them, where a kid who arrived with nothing but nerve and an appetite for action could find a crack in the wall and work it until it became a door. He had been working as a bellman in Boston, carrying bags and collecting tips and watching other people go places. That was the part that got to him. So he left. When he arrived in Las Vegas, he did exactly what you do when you show up in that city with ambition and empty pockets. You find the angle. You stay busy. You make yourself useful until something bigger comes along. Dana White taught aerobics classes. He worked in gyms, training people, learning the business of bodies and competition from the ground up. And he started managing fighters, amateur boxers mostly, guys who were barely more established than he was, operating out of his apartment on handshake deals and pure belief that something was going to break his way eventually. And he was broke, not struggling, not tight. Broke in the way that has a specific texture to it, where every decision has a financial consequence and none of the consequences are good. There are stories from those years. Stories Dana tells himself now with the kind of laughter that only comes from having survived something, about the reality of that life. 16-hour days chasing a dream that did not have a clear shape yet. No roadmap, no mentor, no guarantee that any of it was going to amount to anything at all. He believed in the fight business the way certain people believe in things. Not reasonably, not with appropriate caution and a backup plan. He believed in it completely and staked everything on that belief and tried not to think too hard about what happened if he was wrong. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Dana White had grown up alongside two brothers named Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta. Their father, Frank Fertitta Jr., was a Las Vegas casino pioneer, a man who had built a serious gaming operation in a city that rewarded serious gaming men. The Fertitta family had been in the casino business longer than most people had been in Nevada. Lorenzo and Frank were Dana's closest friends, the kind of friends who knew exactly where you had come from and stayed anyway. In 2000, Dana was managing two fighters, Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell, both competing in an organization called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. The UFC was in serious trouble. The Semaphore Entertainment Group, which owned it, had run out of patience and money. At the same time, they wanted out. They wanted out badly enough that the price was almost impossible to believe. Dana picked up the phone and called Lorenzo Fertitta. He told him the UFC was available. Underneath all the chaos, the controversy, and the political pressure, there was something real there. Something that, with the right vision and the right promotion and the right people behind it, could become something nobody in sports had ever seen before. Lorenzo listened to every word. Then, he called his brother Frank. Then, the three of them sat down together and made a decision that every single person in Las Vegas who heard about it thought was completely, certifiably insane. They were all wrong. The $2 million gamble. $2 million. That's what the Fertitta brothers paid for the UFC in January 2001. $2 million for an organization that had been banned on cable television in 36 states. An organization that the sitting United States Senator John McCain had stood on the floor of Congress and publicly called human cockfighting. An organization that was hemorrhaging cash every single month, had almost no television presence, no mainstream sponsorship, no credibility with any serious sports executive in America, and was considered by most people who knew anything about the fight business to be one regulatory challenge away from complete extinction. Everyone thought Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta had lost their minds. These were serious men from a serious casino family. Their father had built a gaming empire in Las Vegas. They had real money, real businesses, real reputations to protect. And they were about to spend $2 million on a caged fighting organization that the United States government was actively trying to shut down. Dana White became president. Lorenzo became chairman. Frank was the money. From the very first day, the three of them worked like men who understood they might fail, but had made a private agreement to never act like it. The early years were brutal in the way that only true believers ever experience. They lost money every quarter. The losses weren't small, and they weren't temporary, and they didn't come with any guarantee that the next quarter would be different. There were serious conversations, the kind that happened in quiet rooms with lawyers and accountants present, about whether any of this made sense, whether the whole thing should be wound down before it got worse. The Fertitas poured $44 million into the UFC before it turned its first dollar of profit. $44 million, more than 20 times what they paid to buy it. And through every one of those conversations, through every quarterly loss, and every closed door and every network executive who wouldn't return the call, Dana White absorbed it and pushed harder. He was relentless in the specific way that only people who have genuinely had nothing can be relentless. Because when you have been broke, when you have taught aerobics classes to cover rent, when you have managed fighters out of an apartment for next to nothing, failure stops being an abstract concept. Failure means going back to that life, back to that version of yourself that you clawed your way out of. And Dana White was never, under any circumstance, going back to that place. Then came 2005. The UFC was still bleeding, still fighting for legitimacy, still one bad news cycle away from feeling like it was all falling apart. Then came a phone call with Spike TV about a reality show called The Ultimate Fighter, a show that would put fighters in a house together, film their lives, and let America watch them compete for a UFC contract. The network balked at the budget. Dana White made the kind of decision that defines a man. He told them the UFC would film the entire season themselves, absorb every cost, and if the finale did not deliver the numbers, they would walk away with nothing to show for it. The finale became one of the highest-rated programs in the history of basic cable. Overnight, the UFC was something people argued about at work on Monday morning, something their kids were watching, something the sports world suddenly could not dismiss or ignore or quietly hope would go away. Dana White had put everything on a single hand. No safety net, no fallback, no alternative plan. Just the pure, terrifying commitment of a man who had run out of patience for playing it safe. And he had won. Vegas made him rich, then tried to erase him. Here's the thing about Dana White that the sports pages never fully captured. He wasn't just building a fight company in Las Vegas. He was living inside it, breathing the air of a city built entirely on the mathematics of risk, surrounded by gambling every single day, and drawn to the blackjack table the way he'd always been drawn to competition, completely, dangerously, without a single apology. It started as recreation, a way to decompress between fights and negotiations, and the relentless pressure of running an organization that was always one bad quarter away from collapse. Dana White loved gambling the way fighters love sparring. It scratched something deep. Because at its core, blackjack was just another version of the only game Dana White had ever known how to play. Him against someone else. His preparation against their structure. His nerve against their certainty. And he was good. Better than good. He approached the game the way he approached everything else in his life, with obsessive seriousness. He studied basic strategy until it was automatic. He understood the mathematics of card counting, not as some back-alley trick, but as a legitimate skill, no different from a quarterback reading a defense or a poker player picking apart a table. He wasn't cheating. He was simply doing what Dana White had always done. He was working harder than the other guy. He became what every casino in this city is specifically designed to prevent: a sophisticated player with a serious bankroll. The discipline to press when the deck ran hot and walk away when it turned cold, and absolutely no interest in losing gracefully. In a city that was built from the ground up on the premise that the house always wins, Dana White was one of the rare men who could sit down at a blackjack table and consistently take money off it. The casinos noticed. Of course, they noticed. Casinos notice everything. It's the only business in the world where the entire architecture, the cameras, the pit bosses, the shuffle machines, the table limits, every single element exists for one purpose: to make sure the money flows one direction. It started with small signals. A pit boss lingering a little longer near his table. A limit quietly lowered the moment he sat down. A shuffle called earlier than the math required. Subtle messages, delivered with smiles, that his particular brand of business was starting to feel unwelcome. Dana White, who had never in his life responded well to subtle messages, ignored every one of them and kept playing. Then the messages stopped being subtle. You have to understand what it actually means to be backed off in Las Vegas. It isn't a criminal matter. It isn't a scandal. Casinos in Nevada are private businesses with the absolute legal right to refuse service to anyone for any reason, including winning too much at cards. It happens to skilled players every single day in this city. Quiet conversations at the table's edge, polite escorts toward the door, names added to lists that never get published, but never get forgotten either. It just almost never happens to someone like Dana White. Someone whose organization was selling out arenas in this city. Someone whose business was generating hundreds of millions of dollars in economic activity for the same strip that was now telling him to find somewhere else to play cards. The casinos didn't care about any of that. They cared about their hold percentage. And Dana White was destroying it. The Casino Wars. The Palms Casino Resort on Flamingo Road became the most famous chapter in Dana White's war with the Vegas casino establishment. The Palms in the early 2000s was the coolest hotel in Las Vegas. It had the Ghost Bar, 55 floors above the Strip. It had the Playboy Club. It had the kind of celebrity clientele that made gossip columnists work overtime. It was the place to be, and Dana White loved it there. He played there regularly, spent serious money in the restaurants, brought his people, treated it like a home base. He won a lot. And when you win a lot at the Palms eventually tells you something you do not want to hear. They cut his blackjack limit. Then they moved him to a private table. Then they told him they would not deal to him at all. Essentially, they backed him off completely. A man who was spending money across the entire property, who was one of the most recognizable faces in American sports, was told he could gamble anywhere in the building except the one game he actually wanted to play. Dana White went public with it. That was the thing about him. He did not suffer quietly. He told the story on podcasts, on camera, in press conferences. He named casinos by name. He said the whole thing was absurd, that a guy winning at blackjack was treated like a criminal while the casino kept every dollar he had lost over the years without a word of thanks. The Palms was not alone. He was backed off at Caesars Properties, backed off at others. Multiple strip casinos essentially told him his blackjack action was not welcome. In a city where his organization was producing events that filled arenas and generated hundreds of millions in economic activity, the suits in the count rooms were worried about one man at a blackjack table. He told a story once that captured everything. He had sat down at a table, played a few hands, started winning, and within 20 minutes, a casino host appeared at his shoulder. Very politely, very professionally, the host told him they would be happy to comp his dinner, comp his room, take care of anything he needed, but they would not be dealing him any more cards tonight. Dana White looked at the man and said something that only Dana White would say in that situation. The words involved several profanities and a very clear message about what they could do with their comp. He walked out, and he did not forget. Building an empire from the blacklist. The thing about being backed off at blackjack in Las Vegas is that it is supposed to humble you. It is supposed to remind you that this city runs on the house's terms, that the casinos are the power structure, and individuals do not win against institutions. No matter who you are, no matter what you've built, the man in the pit boss chair outranks you the moment you sit down at his table. It worked that way for decades. The mob understood that principle better than anyone. They built the gaming industry on it. You play by our rules, or you do not play at all. For 50 years, everybody played by their rules. Nobody told Dana White about that principle, or if they did, he was not listening. He never listened to principles that were designed to keep other people in line. Because while the casinos were putting his name on their back-off lists, while pit bosses were quietly radioing supervisors and casino hosts were rehearsing their polite little speeches about comped dinners, something else was happening. The UFC was becoming something that made those same casinos look small. Not in terms of revenue. Vegas casinos print money, they always have. But in terms of cultural relevance, in terms of what made a 25-year-old in Cincinnati decide to book a flight to Nevada instead of staying home on his couch. In 2006, UFC 61, headlined by Chuck Liddell, sold out the MGM Grand Garden Arena. Pay-per-view numbers came in, and the boxing establishment went quiet in a way that said everything. In 2007, UFC 66, Liddell vs. Ortiz 2 became the highest-selling combat sports pay-per-view in history at that point, over 1 million buys. 1 million households paying to watch two men fight inside a cage that Dana White had built from nothing. The MGM Grand was packed with celebrities, with professional athletes, with the kind of young, loud, passionate crowd that Las Vegas had spent 50 years and billions of dollars trying to figure out how to attract. And who brought them there? Dana White, the man they would not deal a blackjack hand to. By the late 2000s, the UFC was not just an event promoter anymore. It was an economic engine for the entire city. Fights at the MGM Grand, fights at Mandalay Bay, fights at the Thomas and Mack Center. Tens of thousands of fans descending on Las Vegas every few weeks, filling hotel rooms, packing restaurants, spending money in the clubs, dropping chips on the casino floors. Every UFC event weekend turned Las Vegas into something close to a Super Bowl city. The economic ripple moved through every property on the Strip and downtown too. And the casinos who had backed Dana White off the blackjack table were cashing in on every single dollar of it. They were thrilled to host his events, delighted to sell his tickets, happy to fill their seats with his fans, and their restaurants with his fighters, and their poker rooms with his pay-per-view audience. They just did not want Dana White winning at cards. The hypocrisy was so brazen it was almost beautiful, almost something you had to respect for its sheer audacity. The same city that put his name on a list was getting rich off his name on a marquee. And Dana White watched every bit of it. He filed it away, just like he filed away every no he had ever heard. The house thought it had won. It had no idea what was coming. Chapter 8: The Ultimate Reversal. In 2016, everything changed. Endeavor, the Hollywood talent agency run by Ari Emanuel and Patrick Whitesell, acquired a majority stake in the UFC for $4 billion. $4 billion. For a company bought for $2 million 15 years earlier. Dana White retained his minority stake. The Fertitta brothers received an enormous payout. Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta had already built Station Casinos into one of the largest regional gaming companies in the country, and now they had $4 billion worth of reasons to feel very good about the $2 million they had spent in 2001. Dana White walked out of that deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Dana White's oldest friends and business partners, the men who had backed his vision when nobody else would, were casino owners. Had always been in casino owners. The Fertitta empire was built on casinos. Station Casinos operated properties all over the Las Vegas Valley, including Red Rock Casino, Green Valley Ranch, and Palms Casino Resort. The Palms. The same casino that had backed Dana White off the blackjack table. The casino that had told him he was not welcome at the tables. Red Rock Resorts, run by the Fertittas, acquired the Palms in 2016 for almost $312 million. Let that settle for a moment. The casino that banned Dana White's blackjack action was now owned by his best friends, his business partners, the men who had stood beside him through every loss and every triumph since the beginning. The men he had made billionaires. Dana White did not just get back into the Palms. He walked back in through the front door of a property that was now, in every way that mattered, part of his world. He went from the man they backed off to the man whose partners signed the checks. The Fertittas eventually sold the Palms to the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians in 2021 for $650 million. But by then, the point had already been made. The message had already been delivered with the kind of clarity that only money can provide. You cannot ban the house from the house. What it all means, there is a line from one of Dana White's countless press conference performances that explains everything about him. He was talking about a fighter negotiation that had gone sideways, a deal that everyone said was dead, a situation the whole industry agreed had no resolution. Dana White looked at the cameras and said in that flat Boston accent that never softened even after 30 years in the Nevada desert, "Everyone keeps telling me what can't be done. I've been hearing that my whole life. I don't hear it anymore. That's not bluster. That's not the manufactured bravado of a promoter working a room. That is a man who grew up being told no so many times that the word lost its meaning. A man who had the word no said to him by teachers, by networks, by senators, by casino hosts with comp books in their hands and smiles on their faces. And every single time, he filed it away, not as defeat, but as fuel. The casino establishment of Las Vegas was built by men who understood power, men like Benny Binion, who knew that the house sets the rules and everyone else just lives inside them. Men like the Chicago outfit, who enforced those rules with something more persuasive than a polite conversation. Men who understood that this city only functions when certain hierarchies stay in place, when the big players stay big, and the man at the table knows his position. Dana White never knew his position. Or maybe he knew it perfectly and just refused to accept it. He did not come up through the system. He did not get mentored by pit bosses who had been on the floor since Sinatra played the Sands. He did not inherit a gaming license or a family name that opened doors on Fremont Street. He was a kid from South Boston who taught aerobics to keep his rent paid, who managed fighters out of an apartment, who called his friend Lorenzo Fertitta and talked him into spending $2 million on something every serious person in the sports business called a dead end. And then he proved every serious person wrong. When that organization needed a home, it chose Las Vegas, not by accident. Vegas had the arenas, the hotels, the infrastructure, the electricity in the air that no other American city could replicate. But Las Vegas also needed what the UFC delivered. It needed a reason for a generation that did not grow up watching Sinatra and Dean Martin to care about coming to the desert at all. The UFC gave Las Vegas a new identity for the 21st century. And during the pandemic, When every other sports organization in the world went quiet and waited, Dana White kept fighting. He flew his fighters to a private island, kept producing events, kept the lights on for a city that had gone completely dark. The man the casino establishment had tried to exile was the one who kept Vegas relevant when Vegas needed it most. Some debts get paid in cash, some get paid in power, and some, the most satisfying ones, get paid in the moment the people who wrote you off realize exactly who you became. You do not get to write that kind of ending unless you were willing to endure that kind of beginning. They called it backing off, a polite term for a small act of arrogance by men who thought they controlled this city. They sat Dana White down, took his chips, and told him he was too good to play. They put his name on their lists and walked him out the door. They did not understand who they were talking to. The house always wins in Las Vegas, except when the house loses track of who the house really is. Dana White never forgot what it felt like to be shown the door, and Las Vegas never forgot who he became. Some legends are built on what this city gave them. Dana White built his on what it tried to take away. If you have ever been told you are not welcome somewhere and you used it as fuel, tell me about it in the comments. If you love the stories behind the power, the men who built this city, and the ones who refused to let it break them, hit subscribe. Because every legend has a story, and Vegas never forgets.